Rev up your engines!
Well, GM took an about face. Now, of course, they admitted that they are going to continue to make the Chevy Bolt electric car. Now, they said they're going to stop making them. Well, guess what? The Chevy Bolt currently comprises 93% of the electric cars GM has sold, right? And old Mary Barr, the CEO, said, oh, we're not going to make that anymore. We need the new technology, our Ultium battery, blah, 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 right? Well, I said, that's the stupidest thing I've heard of. It's 93% of their electric car sales, right? Why would you stop making that in terms of things that nobody's really buying? Like, oh, the electric Hummer that's, what, 150 grand, and they sold a handful of them, right? And the Cadillac that's over 100 grand. Finally, maybe these people are realizing, okay, the Chevy Bolt is a small car. The other day, a guy drove one from Maryland to me here in Clarksville, Tennessee, and I checked it out. And he admitted, he said, this is a great car for inner city commuting. This particular guy was a software dude. He worked in Washington, D.C. He lived in Maryland. His commute was 17 miles, and he loved the car for it. And he's had it for 3 years with no problems at all. He's got like 35,000 miles on it. That's what electric cars are really made for. Small commutes, small car, easy to park. Let's face the facts. The majority of Americans drive cars. They're the only person in the car. In his case, he's the only one in the car, commuting back and forth. You don't need a big giant vehicle if you're the only one commuting back and forth. Now, he did admit it was a hassle driving it long distance. He came from Maryland to Clarksville, Tennessee. He said he had to stop at least every 150 miles. It was rated for higher, but he said that's BS. Going 70 miles an hour on the highway, max was about 150 miles he could go, so he had to stop a lot to charge it up. But he did make it through some foibles of, well, this didn't work, he had to go to another place. But he says it's a lot more convenient in town, where he charges it at his townhome, drives it to work, comes back. That's what these things are made for. So finally, GM makes a wise thing and decides, gee, maybe we shouldn't stop making these things since it's 93% of the ones we're presently selling. And as far as I'm concerned, they might have just backed themselves into a smart position. Of course, all their other electric vehicles are talking about, oh, I meant big SUVs, big trucks, blah, 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 right? It's the small ones that make sense. Krusty Krab says, I have electrical issues on my car after a brake repair. Flickering lights, door locks clicking after a brake repair. The windows will not roll down from the driver's side. Took it to a shop, 05 Trailblazer. If they messed with any kind of the wiring, especially ground wiring, while they were under there, it can mess with making lights flicker, especially windows not rolling down and stuff. You want to ask the guys who worked on the car, did you disconnect the battery when you worked on the car? Now, a lot of guys will disconnect the battery of a car when they work on the car. So, when they do so, there's no more power in the car. They can't damage anything. It's actually a very good safety thing to do. With modern cars, once you disconnect the battery, reconnect it, all kinds of things can go haywire. In a lot of cars, you have to reset them. For example, if you had a Mini and you disconnect the battery and put it back on, the sunroof won't work. You got to pay a guy like me who has a special computer to plug it in, reset electric sunroof system. It'll open and close it, open and close it. My machine will automatically do it, and then it'll start working again. In the same way with Windows, right? Ask the guys who worked on it. If they disconnected your battery, say, I'm going to bring it back in. Could you please reset all the stuff in my car? And generally, that'll fix it. Now, if it's not that, either you got a complete coincidence, or somehow they've messed with the wiring system doing that work. They could have shorted something out. They could have, say, shorted out the brake sensor for the anti-lock brakes, and that could have fed back and then whacked out the computer. I've seen that happen too. The dude says, is it worth restoring 20-year-old cars now, like a Jeep Cherokee? I say nay. Not yay, but nay. No, they're made like crap. They got all kind of plastic, especially Jeep Cherokee. They're not made to hold up over time. Now, you go back into the 60s, you talk about Mustangs, Camaros, the GTOs, the GOAT, right? Those were simpler cars. They had carburetors, they had mechanical ignition systems. Everything was pretty simple to fix and you could get it going, right? Modern cars, everything is computerized and made out of plastic. It isn't made to hold up over time. I'll give you a perfect example. I had a nice Mustang. I got to drive it for a week. Ford gave it to me, and I showed it to a guy who likes classic Mustangs. He looked at it and he put his nose down. He said, I don't like it. He says, look at my 60s. They're classic. They're worth a fortune now. He says, look, metal. He says, look at yours. It's all plastic. And he had a point. He said, what do you think that plastic is going to be in shape when it's 20, 30 years old? It's going to crack. It's going to fall apart. And we're talking about parts of the engines. All kinds of stuff is plastic. I would never restore a 20-year-old car because they're not made to last long enough. Their planned obsolescence has been planned out so well that you'd be fixing it forever. And then you just have an old car that, as other people find out you really can't restore these things, guess what happens? The value goes down the toilet. ridiculous because if they're undependable, people don't want them. You get an old 60s car, they're pretty dependable. You know, everything's mechanical. You can always fix it and away you go. But when it's all computer stuff and it's all interrelated, when the wiring harness starts to get old and cracked and corroded, you got to rewire it. Wiring harnesses cost thousands, people to figure out what's wrong. With the old cars, hey, they didn't have computers. They had some wiring, but you could buy some wiring at the hardware store and rewire it yourself. It was simple. The new cars, no. Elijah M. says, I got a Ford Focus steering problem. 145,000 miles. Notice that says steering assist fault, service required. And I'd lose power steering. Turn it off, turn it on, twist it, it'd fix it. Dealership said it's a rack and pinion. One charged me more than a car's worth. What should I do? Unfortunately for you, it's definitely going out. Have a mechanic like me check it out with a fancy computer. If you're lucky, maybe it's a sensor on the steering wheel. Maybe it's the wiring. Maybe it's not the motor. But I hate to tell you, you got an 11-year-old Focus with 145,000 miles. So you're probably going to have to get it. And I mean, if it's going to be more than your car's worth, my advice is you said it comes, it goes, sell the thing. Get rid of it and get a better car. Those are disposable cars, those Focuses. They're only good for so long. Yours is reaching the end of its lifespan anyway. The engine's going to go. The transmission's going to go, right? And now the power steering is starting to go. And if you got to spend that kind of money, I just say, just forget it. Get rid of the car and don't buy another Ford if you want to get more mileage than that out of it. 1, 2, 3, Alfredo says, why does my gas gauge not work on my 06 Chevy Silverado V8? Well, it's a Chevy Silverado. That's why they fall apart as they age, right? Generally, it's a sending unit. Inside your gas tank, there is a float. And it's got a long rod. At the other end is a variable resistor. As it goes up and down, it sends a different electrical impulse to the gauge that shows you how much fuel you have. That's one of the few parts of the car that actually wears out physically because it floats up and down and it goes up and down and up and down. And the resistor gets moved up and down, the little arm. Plus, it's soaked in gasoline and it's an electronic part. Eventually, the circuit board breaks and it doesn't work anymore. Now, unfortunately, you got a Silverado. You gotta drop the gas tank to fix it. So, if you want to fix it, run it until it dies, right? Then you got no gas and it's going to be easier to drop. You drop it when it's full of gas, it weighs a ton. When it's empty, it's easier to drop, and you can buy the piece and put it in. And my advice is if you're going through all that trouble on an 06, change the whole assembly, the float and the fuel pump assembly. You might as well change the fuel pump because it's old. You change the whole unit at once, and then you don't have to think about it for quite some time because it's such a bear to drop the gas tank and do all their work. You might as well change everything and then put it back. You won't have to think about it for a really long time. Well, the Vietnamese EV maker is all ready to start selling stock on the NASDAQ because they did the SPAC merger. If you don't know what a SPAC is, they're called Special Purpose Acquisition Companies. And there's a particular one that's called Black Spade Acquisition on the market with a company, and then they take somebody like VinFast and they can fast forward them to get on the stock market and sell stock and get a bunch of money as fast as possible. Now, a lot of them they used to call shell corporations. There'd be a corporation in name only. They don't do anything anymore. Maybe at one time they did, but now they're still there, but they're usually like penny stocks or something. And then one guy says, I want to get on the stock market. I said, well, you can use my penny stock name, but you got to give me stocks, and then we'll use our name, and we'll be able to get on and bypass a bunch of the regulations for getting on the stock market. It takes years and years to get yourself listed, but if a company's already there, it's pretty much the same as these shell companies used to be, right? If I were you, I wouldn't put my money in this Black Spade Acquisition. VinFast is a new company making electric cars that aren't that popular and have had problems so far. As an example, this year, from January to May, that's 5 months, they sold 128 cars in the United States, right? This is what amazes me. This VinFast and Black Spade has a value of 23 billion American dollars, right? The reason they want to get on a stock market is so these people can cash in. Whether the company succeeds or fails is immaterial to them. They get it on the stock market. In this case, it's the NASDAQ because it's tech, right? They get a bunch of people to invest their money. Now, instead of having stock that on paper is worth money, but actually is worth nothing because you can't sell it. Now it is an actual stock on the NASDAQ and people can sell it and cash in. That is why they do it. If they had a great company that was making a fortune on its own, why would they want to share the money with anyone else? They wouldn't want to. A company that sold 100-something cars in almost half a year, they're going to say it's worth $23 billion. If I were you, I'd keep my money far away from these things. They're just doing it to get other investors to throw money in something that, hey, obviously it's very questionable whether they'll make a profit or not. How can you say a company's worth $23 billion when they only sold 120-something cars in half a year in the whole United States? Think about that before you throw your money into it. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.